So now we talked a bit about different countries' approach. We mentioned e-delivery as a good solution, but we haven't really digged into what it means. Maura presented a bit about access points and the use of Peppol and the analogy of sending text messages in over the phone. And that's, I think, is a good analogy. But Peppol is, we can explain it in 3 big sections. So if you ask someone who knows Peppol, so what is Peppol? They might give you typically three different answers. It is on one part, it is the infrastructure, like the 5G network for mobile phones. Peppol is the infrastructure for sending and receiving electronic documents. That is perhaps what we normally refer to when talking about Peppol. But it is also specifications and standards for invoice, order, dispatch advice, price and product catalogs, even for the pre-award tendering messages, all of that electronically. Peppol provides the specifications for tool vendors to build support. So invoice is just one of many of these specifications. And then Peppol, or Peppol is also a non-for-profit organization which is member financed, that maintains all these specifications and take care of support and so on. So it's a non-for-profit. It's not a company in that sense that people may think that Peppol, it's like a commercial solution that we connect to. That's not the case. It is an open network which is member-driven.
But it also has its own governance policies, and it also has its own member-driven organization, which means that anybody, supplier or buyer side, can participate as being a Peppol member. You don't necessarily have to rely on what's being done with central government towards Peppol. And there are firm elections and proceedings on how to progress into the future.
The majority of the members are those who provide access points. So the service providers are also the majority of the members, but also governmental authorities are members in the form of Peppol authorities, which is called. And we'll come back to that.
It started in 2012, and now it's on the 8th year soon. And in the beginning it was almost 100% public, but now it's 90% private. So it's good to see that the private stakeholders is picking up.
So we looked at the 4-corner model before, where I see that this slide is a bit, it looks like the 4 corners are the service providers. That's not the case. The 4 corners, the buyer is one corner, he has a service provider, that's next corner, and then so the buyer and the seller, and those are the 4 corners, just to make that clear. So they have suppliers on the right side, they have service providers. Oh no, wait, this slide has its own life, sorry about that. Anyway, in Peppol, we have something that is different from traditional 4-corner models. We have a centralized addressing lookup mechanism, and that is what makes it different from traditional EDI or traditional e-business. It means that all the receivers in the network has registered themselves in an address book. There can be many address books, but that, we don't have to go into that now. But it has its own life. So you as a public entity has registered yourself. I can receive electronic invoices, and I'm using this access point. That's part of the address book. And what happens is that the supplier, he issues an invoice, he hands it over to his service provider, his access point. The service provider then makes an addressing lookup based on your identifier, your VAT number or your organization number, some identifier. And then he can, the result from the addressing lookup is that, okay, this buyer is using this access point, and then he can send the invoice. And this happens every time. For every message being sent, this address lookup takes place. It looks like something that is not, pretty obvious functionality, but going back in time, without the dynamic addressing, everybody had to set up all these connections statically or upfront. So you had to ask your customer, which service provider are you using? And then I had to inform my service provider, so they will set up like a big mapping table between all buyers and sellers. And as soon as someone, because that of course happens, the buyer decides to go for another service provider. My contract with my service provider ran out. I made a new competition. I now have a new service provider. And what do we do in Peppol? It's easy. We just update the addressing mechanism, and instantaneously the messages will be sent to the new service provider. So you don't have to take care of the migration from one service provider to another, which was something that was very, very costly before. Particularly as traditionally, you also had to pay for each onboarding. So every time you onboard a new supplier, you had to pay something for this connection to be configured. And if you've done that, and then you move to another service provider, you have to build up these connections again, and you have to pay again. But with Peppol, this is dynamic, so there's not any necessity to do this onboarding and fees for onboarding in that sense. I mentioned that the lookup used some number. So when I'm sending a text message to you, I'm using your phone number as your identifier in the 5G or 4G network. Similarly, in Peppol, we have something called a Peppol ID, which is the buyer and the seller's unique identifier in the network. And it has several names. Participant identifier is sometimes used. In the business term in the European standard is electronic address identifier. So it identifies your electronic address. And it is a mandatory piece of information in the invoice. So when the supplier is going to create his invoice, he must provide this piece of information in the invoice. It is similar to the postal address of the buyer in the paper world. This is the electronic address in the electronic world. So this is a mandatory piece of information. In Peppol, everything that is being sent is also put inside an envelope. And these numbers are also in this envelope. And typically, the numbers looks like this. It has a 4-digit prefix, and then comes a number. The prefix says what type of number it is, and then comes the actual number. So in this case, it's a Swedish organization number. 0007 is a number that the type code for an organization number, and then comes the organization number. And similarly, you have one perhaps for your VAT. Are you using the VAT identifier? Yes. So you have another prefix, and then comes the VAT number, and that becomes your phone number in Peppol. So this is important. And the benefit of this is that as a supplier, the only thing I need to know is your Peppol ID and the fact that you want invoices sent through Peppol. And examples of, we have here two Swedish authorities. One is the Swedish Coast Guard and the University of Gothenburg. On the case of Swedish Coast Guard, on the website under, on the About Us Invoicing, they have a short statement, says that invoicing, our preferred method of receiving electronic invoices is via the Peppol network. And our electronic address is, and the number. And for me as a supplier, even if I don't know what Peppol is, it's just two pieces of information. It's Peppol, okay, and it's a number. So I can call my accountant, or I can call my ERP system, my billing system, and ask, can I do Peppol? I have this number. No, it's easy for the supplier to, on his own, figure out how to do this. After a while, in a few years, probably the billing solutions or accounting solutions for small companies will have built-in functionality for this, and then they will have then they will probably know what Peppol is. But we've seen that this is a big improvement based on how it was before, when you had to inform the suppliers about which service provider you were using, which technical protocols, which technical formats, which version of these formats, a lot of technical things. Now it's very straightforward. This is our ID, and send through Peppol, please. In Peppol, there's something called a Peppol directory, which is somewhere where you can search for the receivers. So in text, so you can just enter, like here in the city of Stockholm, and you will see their numbers, the Peppol ID. So this is like the address book of Peppol, in a sense. Over 200,000 entries or organizations are registered in this directory. Peppol is used, depending on when the country entered Peppol, you will find that they have the adoption has been more or less, as Norway, for example, was very much, they took the initiative in the very start of Peppol and have all the time been propagating for Peppol a lot. They have now over 100,000 registered organizations as receivers. Others, if you take a look at Poland, for example, they have about 6,000 receivers. So, okay, it seems like Poland is only 6,000 and Norway 100,000, but in those 6,000 receivers, you find the whole Polish public sector. And the same goes for many other countries. So you can find, you will get the slides afterwards, and there is a reference here. It's a company who is using open data to create statistics based on the registrations in Peppol. And this diagram, probably you don't see the details, is logarithmic, but you see that many countries have around 1,000 to 4,000, 5,000 registrations. And that is typically that the whole public sector, both central and sub-central, are registered as receivers. And this is, of course, very good news for the suppliers. But then we have many countries with only 2, 3 registrations too. So, Peppol has a set of policies or compliance policies for the service providers, and I will just bring up highlight a few which have relevance on the business side. One thing is that if you're a service provider in Peppol, if you're providing your billing system, if you're connecting that to Peppol, that means that if you're connected, you can serve all. So if you're Sage, for example, I think that's a very common solution here in Ireland. If Sage becomes Peppol enabled, they can use the Peppol connection to all their customers. And so that's one part. Also, the Peppol specifications are mandatory. So if you're doing e-invoicing, you have to support the Peppol BIS, the European standard. And Peppol takes care of the migration between versions, because this happens. The standards are updated, and suddenly you are maybe using the old version, but your customers are using the new version, and you have to take care of all that. It can become very messy. In Peppol, there is a migration policy, so when there are new versions, the whole network must follow the same process of enable the new. So there is cutoff dates, a new date, so it's treating the whole network in the same way. And this is very, very important for the interoperability. So we don't have one country using an old version, another country or another group of suppliers using another version of the standards. Only valid documents, that means that the European standard also has a lot of rules that invoices must be calculated correctly. If you have a VAT amount, the supplier must also state his VAT number. So lots of these type of rules. These are also machine testable, so the service provider can test that an invoice actually following all the rules. And they are not allowed to send anything over the network unless it is compliant to the standard. So it gets a very high quality of the invoices being sent. And that is one of the principles in Peppol, that only valid documents can be exchanged. There is also a know your customer process. So when the service provider enrolls a new company, a new supplier, he needs to go through a process of verifying that it's a valid supplier and all of that. And that is also for the traceability and with the risk of fake invoices and so on. So it has a clear, you can track everything. So those are some of the principles. For the current implementation of Peppol, these numbers are changing and growing constantly, but there are 300 and, when we did this slide a few months ago at least, there were 375 members in Open Peppol, spread out in 34 countries. 250 service providers that provided access points to Peppol. So, and we have 13 Peppol authorities. And the Peppol authorities are taking care of, they are like the national contact point for Peppol, where the service providers can sign agreement with the national Peppol authority and so on. And we have 13 of these. Interesting to see now, it's not only European Peppol authorities, we also have Peppol authorities from Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia coming up. So Peppol is growing also outside of Europe. Christian will mention a little bit about that. So if you are a supplier and you need to send electronic invoices, the best thing, of course, is if your billing system can send your electronic invoices directly. If you have to find another solution, you can look at the Peppol access point, the list here. It's on the peppol.eu. All companies that provide connections to Peppol. Not all may be suitable in a specific case, but you will likely find something that works here. So with that, I'm handing over to Christian again about a little bit from a European Commission perspective of the future challenges.
Yes. As you also heard in the presentation from Maura, e-invoicing has for many of the countries just been the first step. And e-invoicing provides a lot of benefits both for the supplier and buyer side, but we also look at this from the Commission side that it's just one small piece of the puzzle in the entire procurement chain. This means that we will actively, within the European Commission, in the coming year and years, work towards full end-to-end e-procurement, where we have different processes in place for different of the procedures, both in pre-award and post-award. So we will see that here in 2020 and 2021, e-invoicing will merge in together with e-procurement in our different units in the Commission. And we will also see that there will be new calls, funding mechanism, funding frameworks initiated where we are thinking in new processes connected together with e-invoicing. This means that a natural step for many of our stakeholders that are utilizing either the transport infrastructure components from e-delivery and Peppol or the standard, they would now like to benefit and harvest the benefits of further digging into e-procurement, such as payments, such as e-receipts, etc. We can also see that the use of open data will be higher and higher. We have new building blocks coming at the Commission, context broker, big data analysis tools, as well as blockchain technology that has been integrated in various of the member states, so that they can utilize the data and data analysis that are being transmitted, such as the graphics that we saw just before from Peppol. And then, of course, we need to continue to ensure the national coordination between the stakeholders and our different interest organizations. This means that we invite not only the central governmental entities, but also the sub-central entities into collaborating together with us as the Commission. Because, as you heard from Martin, one thing is what is going on and reported from the high level in the different member states. Another thing is reality when we come to the supplier connectivity towards the buyer side. We can see many of the countries are in fact not where they are supposed to be in rolling out the different components and also the transposition of the directive. The international dimension is that We, as a European Union, okay, we just had Brexit. It is very unfortunate for many of the countries here. But before last Friday, at least, the entire European area, Union, was regarded as probably the largest economy in the world. If we look at the individual countries, of course, the United States and China is big on the scale, that's 1 and 2, but the European Union is one of the largest ones. This also means that countries outside Europe are looking towards what are we doing towards GDPR, what are we using towards trust and security with EIDAS. We have had a number of workshops going on, both in Asia, Middle East, and North America, not with us specifically, but with some of our colleagues, where we can hear that countries outside Europe are actually interested in investing in the core components of Europe, which means that they would like to use the same EID components, so that they know that they are compliant with doing trading with buyers in Europe. They would like to use the same governance tools, the same privacy concerns around GDPR, but also within e-invoicing. This means that of course, we have been heavily engaged together with Peppol in rolling out a supportive mechanism towards those countries. Singapore was the first, then Australia, then New Zealand, together with Australia. And it also means that as Martin says, the standard will evolve. We just had the first step now of creating a European standard, but it will evolve and change into something better, and also perhaps an international level. It means that, for instance, within e-delivery, we are right now seeing that standards around e-delivery is being picked up at ETSI level and ISO level. It means that we have various communities on standardization working on the different components into creating this to a truly unique international standard. And then, of course, we have these work in progress as well, both on payments and e-receipts, which are clearly connected to the e-invoicing. It means that, for instance, within SEND, we have right now a workforce or a task force looking into how could we, for instance, do a simple invoice or a receipt, so that whenever a client or a customer, consumer goes out and register their credit card and a point of sale system, they would actually be able to get that receipt automatically into whatever they need, or even on a supplier side. So many good things is going on right now, and it's changing all the time. Of course, we have seen, not only in Europe, but also in the rest of the world, that every time the standard is coming up, you also have different forging, which means that the standard could evolve in different ways. And we are trying to steer around this by having an active role. Which means that we don't want too many standards, both in Europe, but also on an international level. And this means that it takes a lot of effort from our side, as well as the member state, to diverge and also mitigate, build the consensus around keeping the standard together, but also doing the right changes so we get more people and more communities on board.
Let's give it a practical example. The European standard, it has the business terms. I took a few examples before, the issue date and the buyer name and so on. But it also have VAT amount, VAT categories, VAT rate. VAT, something that we use in Europe. If you go to Australia, they use sales and service and goods tax. And in US, they have another tax system, which is not VAT. The European standard, it specifically mentions VAT. It doesn't mention service and goods tax. So on an international level, the standard must become a little bit more generic to allow for different type of tax regimes. And that is one part that is now starting out in pilots, so to speak. But at some point, hopefully, we will have an international standard that can be used across the world. But that is tremendously hard to do that. It's hard to create a standard for Europe, but we have a harmonized VAT directive. Outside of Europe, we don't have the full picture.
Let's also be very clear around one thing that the Commission aims at. We have never intended or invented the standards or supported Peppol by having an idea that you should replace any system, that you should replace any components in your back end. We always had the idea that you should make it, this should be made as interoperable and easy as possible, which means that the goal for us, the ultimate goal for us, is to provide the service providers, the suppliers, with the right set of tools together with the member states, so they have easier connection and also easier availability, so that they can actually transmit these documents to you. And this is also the goal when reaching outside Europe. I think for the sake of time, we should go into Slido once again.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have 2 questions for you just before the break. So I guess that you're all warmed up now with all the questions that we've been
perhaps
posing.
we also have some questions. We'll check that. But first of all, let's look at Slido. The next question is coming up. Is your organization connected to Peppol? 16, 20, okay, don't know. Yeah.
It's very typical for most of the member states. There is a growing sense of urgency.
I think we had numbers here, so there was about 40 governmental authorities that are connected. Yeah. So. But soon, hopefully before the April, it will be yes, 100%. Are you laughing? We are going home tomorrow. So.
11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So we can squeeze
Okay.
in.
So next question.
Do you have foreign suppliers? And you have different options here, and you can respond to all of them. Yes, from EU and UK. Yes, both EU and internationally. Only a few or none. Many of the countries who already had a strong legacy, either within invoicing or with the transport infrastructure, have decided also to continue nationally with supporting their own standards. This means that the countries like Italy or Spain will have still have their national formats coexisting together with the new standard for invoicing.
This is interesting. Typically, what we see is that municipalities often have lots of regional, local suppliers. Universities and health sector have a lot of foreign suppliers. And it also points out the fact that the international aspects is important when it comes to standardization. So should we see if there are questions?
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions.
More? Yes, there are questions. Yes. So I think they will pop up on screen if I... Oh, 19 questions. Mm-hmm.
Is it 19 or 29? Let's.
Is there a list directory of Peppol-enabled accounting software available? Yes, if they are access points, if they are Peppol service providers, they will be on that list that I mentioned on peppol.eu. It is very, very common that accounting software packages are not implementing Peppol natively. They are partnering with another service provider, and then they will not be on the list. So therefore, it's worth checking closely. Even if they are not on the list, it might be in their offering. They may offer Peppol anyway because they have a partner that is a Peppol access point.
How many suppliers in Ireland are sending Peppol-compliant invoices? Is there a list of those suppliers?
No.
So
no.
Declan is saying no?
We don't have information on the supplier side, unfortunately. We do know that the volume of invoices that are being submitted to central government bodies is not very much. But again, we're not surprised by that. It's still early days. There isn't a clause in our procurement contracts. There isn't a mandate. So it's going to take a while to drive that.
Mm-hmm. And also, technically, in the Peppol directory or in the Peppol addressing book, you have all the receivers, but you don't have all the senders. So those who can receive are in the register. So if you're a supplier who only sends electronic invoices, you will not be seen in the directory. So therefore, it's hard to keep track of how many issuers there are.
So are the PowerPoint presentations being made available for download? Yes. Normally we have a long range of slides providing the general introduction of us. where you will also get some information on how to get the slides. Besides that, our distinguished host here and Maura in the back will, of course, already have a copy of this, and it will be provided. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Do we have to be using Peppol to be compliant if we can currently process invoices and purchase orders electronically using an existing EDI solution? Are we compliant? If you are implementing the European standard, that is what the directive says. You must be able to receive electronic invoices that are compliant with the European standard. And there are, I would say, a very straightforward approach is to use the Peppol specifications and the Peppol network. You can, of course, if you have existing EDI, ask them to implement the European standard. But then remember that the suppliers that are connecting to Peppol will not necessarily be able to send invoices to you if your EDI service provider is not a Peppol access point.
Yep. Does Peppol allow suppliers to maintain items such as bank accounts, contact details, etc.? So is this regarding the directory?
Does Peppol allow? Peppol is just the infrastructure between. So Peppol doesn't store any information in that sense. It just acts as the framework for where the access points are exchanging this data.
So within the Peppol directory, you'll be able to look up the unique number, how you're identified. You will also be able to see the name, and then you'll be able to see what are my capabilities of receiving. So I could receive orders and invoices and credit notes, these kind of things. There's not the contact details per se.
And you cannot use Peppol directory to look up bank account numbers. No, that's something that you need to exchange directly with the suppliers.
How does invoicing work during the audit process, when usually hard copies are required?
With the legislation, an e-invoice is equivalent to a paper invoice. And if your auditor says that he requires paper copies, then you should have a talk with some other auditor, or perhaps contact you or some other who can help you, because the e-invoice is supposed to be enough. So I guess we don't have time for more questions.
Electronic invoices is a legal binding document now. So, okay.
So coffee and
break.
Thank you.
Thank you.